So, about a week ago, LevelCap put out a video titled Newbie Guide to Dogfighting at 4K Battlefield 5. And I thought, since I fly planes a lot in Battlefield 5, I might as well test out his tips. Or tip, seeing as there was only one maneuver he really talked about. But we'll get back to that in a second. One of the things he talked about was his key bindings, which I'm not going to get into because I play on Xbox. My controls are set up similar to the veteran button layout and southpaw stick layout, with the only difference being the fire and R ping buttons are swapped. Now, the maneuver LevelCap talked about in this video was air braking. He didn't get into it too much, as he stated it was more of an advanced technique, which I would argue isn't, even though I hadn't actually really used it before I watched his video. I mean, all you do is hit the brakes when someone's behind you. It's really not that hard to do. That said, the maneuver does work, but there are some risks involved. Firstly, you leave yourself open when performing this maneuver for obvious reasons, especially if you're going up against more than one plane. There's really no way to avoid this other than to be aware of your situation. If you're going to pull this off, there are two things you need to consider. One is distance. The air radar only covers 250 meters, so using that as a basis, if the enemy is at the edge of your radar and is still hitting you, you're better off trying to fly fast out of there and outmaneuver them. Hitting the air brakes then will just leave you open, and if the enemy sees you braking and they brake too, you're still going to be in their sights and they're going to shoot at you. The second thing you need to consider is your health. Based on what I've tested, in a fighter plane, if you're at 70% health, you could successfully pull off the maneuver depending on how far away the other player is. At 50% health or lower, you're probably better off trying to lure the enemy plane out of bounds and try to get him to die as well. Bear in mind that having an emergency repair kit ready can drastically change the outcome of the dogfight if you use it at the correct opportune moment. If you're in a heavy aircraft, I'd say it's still worth trying to pull off the maneuver at 65% health. Anything less than that, you may want to consider your other options. You also need to commit to the maneuver. Obviously, if you accelerate out of the stall too soon, the maneuver won't work because you're still going to be in the enemy's sights. All this is great for performing the maneuver, but how does one actually counter it? Well, answer is simple, is you just brake as well. The way I fly, I usually have my finger on the brake when I'm firing to help keep my reticle on target, and when I'm getting close to someone, I usually start hitting the brakes pretty soon. I noticed I had difficulty braking, aiming, and firing at the same time when I used the veteran button layout, which is why I opted to customize my controls. If you're hitting the brakes and are still coming up on the other player too quickly, you can bank to the side or pull up to help stay behind them. This also works if you and your pursuer are both hitting the brakes and are next to each other. During my testing, I tried combining air braking with other maneuvers with mixed results. Initially, I tried to disguise my braking by banking up and using gravity to help slow me down faster, but half the time, the enemy slowed down with me enough to take advantage of the opening and kill me. Other than air braking, the only other defensive tactic is to utilize the high altitude specialization to lure enemy planes to their height limit so they stall and you can get behind them. If you're in a heavy aircraft like the Mosquito or a Stuka, this tactic comes in handy, but it comes with the same risks as air braking. Now, the problem I have with a lot of the plane tutorials out on the internet right now is that they don't really dive into how to actually fly the plane. And by that, I don't mean key bindings and button layouts, I mean flying in the game. Probably one of the most important things to do is yaw in the direction that you are banking. And what do I mean by that? Well, if your controls are set up like mine, when you bank to the left, you want to keep moving your right analog stick to the left. As you can see in this clip, yawing in the direction that you are banking makes you turn slightly quicker. Now, half a second doesn't seem like much, but it makes all the difference, especially if you combine it with air braking. Almost all the encounters I've won have been because I yaw and bank at the same time. I also find that it helps keep your reticle on target. Something I've noticed when dogfighting is that sometimes the other player will bank with the plane's belly in, and I've never seen any other YouTuber address this, and so I wanted to test it out for myself to see if there was any difference between banking with the plane's belly in and banking with the plane's belly out. As you can see, banking vertically with the plane's belly out is 2 seconds faster than banking with the plane's belly in. The same is true vertically down and horizontal. Another thing that I've tested is switching banking directions. If you spiral into a switch, it's about a second faster than if you were to just switch normally. The last thing LevelCap talked about were specializations. There's really not much for me to add to that, other than to stay away from nitrous and field repair if you're in a fighter plane. Both replace the emergency repair kit, which I find is much more useful than either of them. The heavy fighters and bombers can tank more shots than the fighters, so it's really not as bad on them, but not having an emergency repair kit in a fighter plane puts you at a huge disadvantage in dogfights. As for using bombs or pod rockets or the 37mm cannons on the Stuka B2, I personally like using the pod rockets or the cannons on the Stuka. I don't feel like I'm very good with the bombs. I've never used them before the patch, so they might have been better before, but right now, I don't think bombs are really that good. Personally, I like being able to see my targets and shoot them from a distance rather than try to drop bombs on them, because sometimes I'll miss and it's hard for me to tell whether or not it's actually going to hit. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.